Champaign County Agriculture Today with your host, Dennis Riggs.
Hello there, and welcome to Champaign County Agriculture Today. My name is Dennis Riggs, your host for the program for the next half hour or so, as we talk about an important industry here in East Central Illinois, and that is agriculture. Whether you eat 3 times a day, whether you work in agriculture, or whether you're a farmer yourself, all of the issues that affect agriculture affect all of us here in East Central Illinois and, quite frankly, around the world. Today, we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic called biotechnology. It's something you may have heard a lot about, you may have questions about, and we hope to answer those questions over the next 30 minutes. On our panel today, we have 3 great experts and folks that are going to fill us in on all those details. We're going to start out here to my immediate left with Steve Stierwalt, and Steve is a farmer down in the Sodorus area. Steve, give me a little idea, what type of farm do you have, and how long have you been a farmer?
Well, Dennis, I graduated from the University of Illinois way back in 1977, and had an opportunity to go into farming at that time, and we farm corn and soybeans, and we'd like to tell our non-farm friends that we have a 3-way rotation: corn, soybeans, and Florida, but that don't always get the last part of the rotation.
Usually doesn't get that last part done, I can imagine. Our second panelist today is Dr. Stephen Moose. Stephen is an associate professor of crop sciences here at the University of Illinois. Stephen, give us an idea where your hometown is, where you're from, and what got you here to the University of Illinois.
I'm from Northeast Ohio originally. I grew up in a dairy farm there, and did my a PhD at North Carolina State University and worked on corn there. Worked on corn for about 20 years, corn genetics and biotechnology. Also spent some time in private industry. Worked for DeKalb Genetics, famous company here in Illinois, and then they were purchased by Monsanto, so I worked for them for a while. So I've seen, sort of the industry side of this issue. And then in 1999 came here to the University of Illinois. I teach a course in biotechnology to undergraduates and also grad students. Great.
Well, glad to have you on today. It'll be interesting to hear your comments on biotechnology. And lastly, down on the far left there is Robin Orr. Robin, good to have you with us today. Robin is professor of food science and human nutrition at the University of Illinois. Those, I'm sure, go together very nicely. Give us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and how long have you been here at the university?
Well, I have my PhD's in nutrition marketing and gerontology, and I got that from Iowa State University, USC, and Pepperdine. And my interest is around people who eat food. And I coordinate 2 federal programs that feed families at risk, and we see about 1 million people in the state of Illinois every year who need food. And they're very excited that there's a ready, available supply of food in the state when we need it.
I think we all are, especially 3 times a day, or maybe 4,
maybe
or
less.
5, or something like that. Well, we're doing something a little bit different today, and in addition to the questions we're going to talk about here on our panel, we also went out on the quad of the University of Illinois and asked some folks out there what they were thinking. So without further ado, we're going to roll a tape here that has some questions about what our man on the street is thinking about biotechnology.
What's the point of farmers using genetically modified organisms?
How much of the plants that farmers plant are genetically modified?
Do farmers spray their fields to kill everything that moves?
Well, those were some interesting questions. I'm sure our panel will be glad to answer those. I can't wait to hear the answers myself. Let's start out, Robin, with that first one. What is the point of farmers using genetically modified organisms? We often refer to them as GMOs. We'll try to do that in the program here, but they're actually genetically modified organisms. What's the point?
Actually, the point is we need food. We have shrinking farmlands. We have fewer and fewer people producing food, and genetically modified organisms in my world of nutrition allows us to get food that have less waste and be able to get a good quality food to the table when people need it.
It's an important part for the food chain then.
Absolutely.
Okay. Stephen, what do you think about that? Is it something you run across a lot? I know your research with the South Farms, the agronomy farms. How long has this trend for a genetically modified crop been in place?
I think the first wave of these products came out in the mid-1990s. And the reason I think they've really taken off since then is there are real benefits to growers. And because of that, there are advantages in terms of labor and not having to handle chemicals and so forth. So there are some real advantages to the producer and to the consumer as well. There are benefits there, and
The question I get, Stephen, quite a bit, and Robin, I'm going to let you answer that. People ask me, genetically modified, does that mean it was shot by a nuclear ray or it came from an alien country? Just what is a genetically modified organism, and how did it get that way?
It gets that way because they alter the genetic makeup of the organism to get rid of the things that would cause harm and that would attract bugs and it's a way of making the genetic pool of the crop stronger. And we can't wait generations sometimes for things to get better, and we have the technology to change things in a way that is very, very thoughtfully done.
So it's not necessarily something that's turned out bad. It's actually something that's turned out good, and we take benefit in that?
And absolutely, and it doesn't matter if it's genetically modified or not. If it isn't fresh, it doesn't taste good.
There you go. Well, Stephen, that's a question I've got. People are sometimes concerned about our corn and soybean crops, and they hear GMO, genetically modified. But you know what? I like seedless grapes. Why is it that seedless grapes, which is a GMO, is a good thing, but when we talk about number 2 yellow dent corn being GMO, it's a bad thing? What's the difference?
I think one difference is that corn is, we don't necessarily eat corn in the, as a raw material. We don't buy it in the store, number 2 yellow dent corn. We do buy seedless grapes, and we see, immediate the benefit of that at our tables. And so corn's sort of an indirect thing, and so it's somewhat distant. And so I think that's one reason why people don't quite understand the benefits directly to themselves.
Well, Steve, you're a farmer here in Champaign County. Do you use genetically modified crops on your farm?
Yes, I do, Dennis. And when you're talking about Dr. Steve talked about the benefits, and for us, we have pests that we have to deal with all the time. Whether they be weed pests or insect pests and like that will attack our crops. And what we found with some of these genetically modified, let's just talk about corn. One of the pests that we've had a lot of trouble with is a corn borer. And the only way we had to control corn borer in the past was to actually use a pesticide to go out and to try to kill that insect. And what we found through genetic modification, we have a way of controlling that corn borer without having to spray it with a pesticide, and so we're getting the benefits of a better quality crop with the environmental benefits of not having to use a pesticide out in the environment.
So let me get this straight. You're telling me that because we use a GMO, which is a naturally occurring event in a crop, that we can actually reduce our use of crop protection chemicals? Is that right?
That's correct. What's in this particular case, the BT is the event that is actually that we use to take care of this corn borer insect, and that's has been put into the plant, and so we don't have to spray for it to control that insect. So it's good for the environment, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, Robin, I know you're working with food and nutrition and the different ingredients to make up our final result, which is the food that's on our table. Yet we hear many times this information deluge about bad crops, about farmers are messing up the environment. Do you see that? Is that the case, or are we getting the wrong information there?
Actually, I think there's so much information out there, no one knows what to believe. And, in nutrition, we're kind of guilty of changing our minds. And I would suggest that it hasn't kept the American public from eating. Just a small little thing, but I think that there's a variety of foods available in the marketplace, and people, in order to make good decisions, people need to think about how they process any information. They have the internet, they have newspaper, and in the last 10 or 20 years, science has become very newsworthy, and it hasn't coupled with a public that understands it. So we have to spend a little more time on the science end, explaining to people what risk is and when to take risks and what actually is a risk. And I think I'm always happy that when I travel around the world that I can come home and I know where the food comes from and I know what's in it. And we have strong labeling laws, we have strong advocacy for whichever side you want to agree with or not agree with. And pretty much I think there's room for all of us in an economy that's agriculture in the United States.
Well, let's take a walk down the aisle at our local grocery store for a moment. Give me just off the top of your head maybe some genetically modified crops that we may not think about, or some that we come in contact with every day. What are some examples?
Well, you've already mentioned the seedless grapes. There's a seedless watermelon. There's seedless tomatoes. There's fruits and vegetables we can do more with. But I would suggest that some of the foods that are in the grain department have also been genetically modified in your breads and in your cereals. And we just there's any number of foods, and they're not dangerous. They're just the way that we do it to keep food longer. We do it to make food more available, and we do it to make it so that we have access to a good food supply.
Stephen, one of the questions that our panelists or our people asked of us as a panelists is how much of the crops that are planted today are genetically modified. Is there a number out there? Do we have a handle on that?
Yeah, I think so. In the case of soybeans, about 85 to 90% this year are estimated to be genetically modified, and most of those are the Roundup Ready soybeans that are resistant to the Roundup herbicide. In corn, it's about 50% maybe this year. And that's been a big increase actually over the last couple of years. And part of that is because of, and that's especially true locally here, the corn varieties that are resistant to the corn rootworm, which is a very nasty pest that's caused root lodging and even drought problems in a drought year. So that new product, which just came out 2 years ago, we're sort of in corn rootworm central here in East Central Illinois, and so that's been a very popular thing locally here. But nationwide, in the U.S., about 35% of the corn genetically modified, and about 85% of the soybeans.
Let's take a look out a little bit further, maybe than just East Central Illinois, to possibly some other crops. Are there, other than corn and soybeans that we've already talked about, are there other crop examples of genetically modified that's going on?
Yes, there's actually some that maybe people aren't so familiar with. For example, butternut squash is genetically modified to be virus resistant. There are potatoes were genetically modified to be insect resistant. There's rice that's been engineered to have more vitamin A, and that's actually intended to be sold more in the third world, developing countries where vitamin A deficiency is a real problem. And so those are some other ones. Also alfalfa. So we don't think about, it's not a food for us, but animal feed. Alfalfa is also genetically engineered. And canola, where we get canola oil, also genetically engineered. Most of these are resistant to either herbicides or to insects. That's been the two main areas.
Sounds like the list is long, and it sounds like these are basically making the crop a stronger, more healthy crop. But Robin, how can we be assured that the food that we're eating is safe? You mentioned traveling overseas and coming back home and happy to go down the grocery store shelves of your local hometown grocery. How can we be assured that it is safe out there?
Actually, we have all kinds of constraints on our food supply. We have lots of different levels where people inspect food. We have lots of different levels where people who handle food have to be safe to handle food. And the major place where people have problems with food and food being unsafe, frankly, is when they make it themselves, when they make it at home. The rest of the world is much more tightly regulated than we are in our homes. And it isn't the issues around genetically modified food are a fear, and there's been a fear. There was a fear with irradiated food. There's a fear with lots of different kinds of food because people don't understand it. And I think that when people understand that, we do the same thing with people, we do the same thing with all kinds of things, that this is, and the people who are doing it are reasonable, rational people who want the world to be a better place. They're not, there's no evil empire out there. Everybody wants us to have better food.
That's exactly right. Well, I remember watching my grandfather when he farmed. One of the selection processes they used was when the crop was being harvested, the corn crop especially, they pull out the big ears. This is before hybrid seed corn. Pull out the big, nice-looking full ears and put those back as being the seed for next year. Stephen, how is that different from genetically modified? I would guess there's quite a bit of difference there.
There's some difference, but there's also a similarity in that since almost all agriculture could be considered biotechnology in a sense, because human intervention in terms of like our corn, for example, doesn't exist in the wild. It's a human creation. And so it's been modified from its wild ancestor. And most of our domesticated crops are like that: wheat, barley, rice. You name any of them. And so what genetic engineering does or biotechnology is a faster, more precise way of achieving the things that breeding or conventional selection would do. But it does it much faster in a more precise way. We understand a particular gene will have this effect, and it's a beneficial effect, and we can change that one particular gene without changing other things like yield or drought tolerance or other types of beneficial traits that that have already been selected for.
Well, Steve, our persons on the street had this burning question, and I want to pose this one to you. Do farmers spray their fields to try to kill everything that's moving out there? If it's moving, you're spraying it? Is that what you do on your farm?
I can answer that one pretty easily, Dennis. No, that's not what we do. When we apply crop protection products, there are very specific things that we're looking for, and for one thing, they're expensive, and as from the economic side of things, we're very careful as far as how we use those. And for farmers now to use crop protection products, we're licensed, and we go through training every 2 years, and you have to pass a test to get your license. So farmers nowadays have a lot higher level of knowledge of crop protection products, how they're used, how to use them properly, and when they need to be used. So we're very, very conscious about using them properly, and don't want to use them if we don't have to.
We keep talking about genetically modified corn, beans, or whatever. Steve, I want to ask you, if we go out to the South farms, it sounds like we're talking about things from two different worlds, like one is purple and one is polka dotted. If you've got experiments going on, can you tell by looking? Is there a difference there?
Not usually. The only way you could probably tell the soybeans apart from non-genetically modified is if you sprayed them with Roundup. Those that died you knew were conventional and not genetically modified. With corn, there's really no way to tell, again, unless, like in the case of the rootworm resistant varieties, where there's a wind and a lodging event that would cause lodging, and where the rootworm beetles have the larvae have chewed the roots and caused the plants to fall over. If you have genetically engineered protected corn, then those won't fall over, so you'll see it then. But otherwise, no, they would look the same, they yield the same, and the quality of the crop is the same.
Well, Robin, I'm going to go back to you and go back to that grocery store question again. Do these crops taste different? Is there a difference in the way they appear on the grocery shelves?
There shouldn't be, and there isn't. And I would tell you that the American consumer buys food that tastes good. And if they quit buying it, then we need to change things. But currently people are buying plenty of food, and they're eating lots of food, and we don't have a shortage of food in a large part of the population. So I'm thinking that most people are unaware of how food is made anyway. We ask children where milk comes from, and it comes from the grocery store. And there are some, so we don't have a high level of decision making in things, and people buy food they like.
Consumers base their food choices on what they like and maybe even a price point. Farmers base what they grow on their ability to do a good job and grow a wholesome and healthy crop. Is there anyone overseeing any agency, or is the government looking over this whole thing of biotechnology, genetically modified organisms? Robin, I'll ask you, who is watching over this to make sure it's all on the up and up?
I would say that it's absolutely, has always been true, and USDA watches over all of it, and they get a little input from FDA occasionally if somebody complains.
FDA meaning?
The Food and Drug Administration. Depending upon what we're looking at in terms of food, and where food, and what becomes food and what becomes non-food.
Well, I know, Stephen, you research these crops all the time. Is this a dangerous thing to be around these types of crops, to work in the same field as they are? Is there any problems there?
No. I have been working with genetically modified corn in some form or another, and different kinds, in fact, for over 10 years, and never had so much of a rash or sneeze or any of that from genetically modified corn, and I'm sure the same as with soybean. These things have all these products have to even get a experiment approved by the USDA. You have to go through an approval process, and if there's any potential that it could be allergenic or toxic, then those experiments are usually not approved. And so, and there have been numerous examples where experiments have been initiated, and it's discovered then, well, maybe there could be an allergenic issue. For example, there was a soybean that was engineered to have better methionine, amino acid, and it was discovered that the protein they were using to increase the methionine was from a Brazil nut, and it was the same protein that causes an allergy in people who have allergies to Brazil nuts. So that project was stopped very early on when that was realized. So there are a lot of safeguards in place.
There are also safeguards in our universities. You don't get to just do anything you like. You have to go before a board of people in a variety of disciplines to make a decision about if you can or cannot do your research and who it will affect and how it will affect long term. So in addition to government constraints, there are constraints within research at every level, so that you don't just get to do anything willy-nilly, make stuff up.
We're familiar with research as Robin out in the field that Stephen does, and of course Steve also a little bit as he experiments each year to grow a better crop. What type of experimentation does the university do as far as the nutrition side to make food better?
We look at all kinds of different things. We look at putting different foods together for improving the balance in your diet. We look at ways to manage diets in terms of the makeup to improve diabetes. We look at a lot of chronic diseases and how you can improve the status of a chronic disease. And we also use animal models, and we use human models. And animal models have the constraints on using animal models are very similar to the constraints on using human models. It's very tight. Everything is very well regulated, and we look at lots of different things, and we look at a lot of things that we never hear about because they don't go anywhere, but we do find out a huge amount of information about things that work better in the food supply and things that don't.
So you're telling me every research doesn't turn out with positive results?
No, and when you're a grad student, they tell you, you don't have to change the world, you just have to know how others might be doing it.
Okay, good point. Well, Stephen, I'm going to go back to you and let you answer the question that I asked Steve as far as the research side, spraying everything that moves out there. That's a concept, and I can understand if you're driving down the interstate and you see a big sprayer going down the field and it's got 60 feet of booms spread out there and there's a mist of spray coming out. It looks like you're basically spraying everything that moves. Should I be concerned about that as I drive by?
Potentially, I guess, if you're spraying everything that moves, but usually these chemicals are selective to some degree. Or you could, the image of a crop duster, just blanketing a field with insecticide, and that's actually something where biotechnology has a real benefit because the toxins are in the plant. So the only insects that are going to be affected by a biotechnology product like BT corn are those that actually munch the plant, that they eat it. And so all the other insects that are beneficial in the environment and the ecosystem are not affected at all. And that's very different than a crop duster or a boom sprayer where you'd be killing potentially everything that is in the field.
Mm-hmm. Steve, on your farming operation, what types of controls do you use? Is it the seed? Is it the spray? Is it the ground? Where do you use biotechnology on your farm?
In my particular operation, we're strictly corn and soybeans. Mm-hmm. And so the biotechnology that we have immediate access with would be like, as was talked about earlier, Roundup Ready soybeans. And just if you want to just talk about those sort of as a for instance, it used to be that we would apply crop protection products to the soil that had a residual activity, and they would stay around to control weeds that way. When we moved to Roundup Ready soybeans, the Roundup, as it turns out, is a very environmentally friendly product because once it hits the dirt, once it hits the ground, it's basically inert. There is no residual. It doesn't show up. There isn't anything there to get into groundwater and like that. So, just as I say, as an example, the Roundup Ready soybeans have turned out to not only be economically beneficial, in my opinion, they're environmentally beneficial because we don't have residual herbicides out there.
Robin, I keep taking you back to the grocery store. I hope you don't mind, but I know that's your
store.
expertise. The crops that are in the tomatoes, the cucumbers, the squash that are in the produce shelves, should we be concerned that there's residue of crop protection chemicals on them, and how do we know?
Actually, we make the assumption that everyone takes everything they get in the grocery store that's fresh, in terms of produce, they take it home and wash it before they use it anyway. And there aren't residuals for the most part on crops, on foods that show up. And we're seeing a diversity of kinds of crops that show up. And I would suggest that even people who work in organics do biotechnology. They rotate crops to make sure they get different. They can grow different things, and they can get rid of problems. So you need to wash everything before you eat it anyway. So go with it.
Okay. Stephen, the way farmers protect their crops against insects and weeds has always been, spraying has been an important thing for many years now. But I can remember when huge volumes of a chemical was used to go over, let's say, 20 acres, for example. I've seen that volume go down and down and down. Are we applying less chemicals today than we did 10, 15 years ago?
Yes, I think so, and that Roundup Ready soybeans are a great example where it used to be different kinds of chemicals, maybe at different times during the growing season to take care of weeds. Now, one treatment with one chemical that breaks down in the environment very, very quickly is the preferred way of doing this now. And so, again, a real advantage there. And on the insecticide issue there, you're going, in using biotechnology, you're going from using potentially large volumes of insecticide to none. And so there's a real advantage.
We talk about $1 savings, Steve. You know, it's no small item to grow a crop of corn or soybeans this year. What kind of savings are we talking about? What's it cost to grow corn and soybeans on your farm?
It keeps going up.
More than it did last year.
But anytime we can avoid having to make an application of another product or something like that, it's very important to us farming is very competitive, and anytime that we can help our bottom line by not making applications, obviously that's very important. So what we look at when we're trying to decide whether to use a biotechnology product is as we talked about, is as you asked, is the economic side of it. There is an extra cost to the farmer when he buys a product, let's just say Roundup Ready soybeans. There's what they call a technology fee that we pay extra to get that seed compared to a non-modified soybean. So there is a cost, but we figure that but we see the savings on the other end.
Rob, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Steve's talking about his cost of production are going up, trying to save costs, and we're trying to cut those costs down as possible, but we don't really see the prices in the store maybe go down in relation to that. Is there a relationship between the price of that sweet corn in the produce section and what Steve has to pay to grow that acre of corn?
Actually, and I would say most of that money, most of the cost in that isn't Steve's cost. Most of the cost of that is the middle people that handle food. And we still, even with that, we have the least expensive food supply in the world. We have safe food, and we're very used to paying very little for food as a nation. And if we want to change how outcomes are affected in growing food, then we're going to have to pay a whole lot more for food. And frankly, the American public likes a bargain.
And we sure do. And one of those bargains was watching this program today and getting all this information for free. And that's why we're glad you're here today. We hope you'll tune in again next time when we bring you the important issues of agriculture right here on Champaign County Agriculture Today. Until then, this is Dennis Riggs. Thanks for listening.
Champaign County Agriculture Today is brought to you by Champaign County Farm Bureau.